Elena paced nervously through the old house, her hand absent-mindedly gliding along the time-worn wooden banister. Today, she was supposed to sign the paperwork to sell the house she had inherited from her parents. Everything was packed. The buyer had scheduled the notary appointment in an hour. The room still carried the scent of dust and a faint echo of the past, a mix of old books, faded curtains, and a trace of smoke from long-gone family evenings by the fireplace. Her heart ached with heavy thoughts. This house had seen her childhood, it held the lives of her parents, grandparents. But time had taken its toll. The place needed serious repairs, and there was no money. On top of that, her mother's long illness had left debts behind. Sell the inheritance or drown in debt? That question had haunted Elena for months. Finally, with a heavy heart, she decided that selling was the only option. It's for the best, she told herself, trying not to dwell on the fact that she was letting go of everything her family had built. Forgive me, she silently whispered to her late parents. She picked up the folder with the documents from the nightstand. Her hand trembled. She knew that if she allowed her emotions to take over now, she'd never be able to go through with it. So she tied her hair into a tight bun, put on her coat, and was just reaching for the door handle when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She flinched. Pulling out the phone, she saw a new message. The sender was unknown, no number, just the word unknown. Elena frowned and opened it. Don't sign the contract until you've checked the basement. She froze, staring at the words. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this a joke? Maybe a scam? She almost dismissed it, but something about that message stuck with her. The basement? Why the basement? Her house had a spacious old cellar where the family had stored everything over the years, old furniture, boxes of papers, things too sentimental to throw away. Since her mother's passing 3 months ago, Elena hadn't touched the basement. She hadn't had the strength or the time to sort through what was left behind. She still hadn't gone through her mother's belongings. Every time she opened a wardrobe, the familiar scent hit her like a wave, and her heart would clench with grief. She glanced at the clock. The meeting with the buyer was coming up fast. Elena crossed the empty living room, catching her reflection in the dark screen of the turned-off TV, pale face, lips pressed tight. Am I losing my mind? She thought. Canceling a deal because of an anonymous message? But her feet were already carrying her toward the basement door. The light bulb barely glowed, casting a trembling light over the concrete steps. Elena descended, brushing her hand against the rough wall. The air smelled of dampness and old newspapers. She shivered from a sudden chill. The basement greeted her with chaos, boxes everywhere, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and random dusty junk. What am I even looking for? She muttered, squeezing past an old sideboard and a broken chair. The message still glowed on her phone screen. She turned on the flashlight and slowly swept the beam across the corners. Cobwebs shimmered in the light. Something crunched under her foot, a piece of broken ceramic. There didn't seem to be anything unusual. But after a few minutes, something near the back wall caught her eye. An old trunk, partially covered by a faded rug. Her heart started pounding harder. She didn't remember seeing that trunk before. It looked like no one had opened it in decades. Setting her phone down on a barrel, Elena pulled the heavy rug aside with both hands, stirring up a cloud of dust that stung her nose and throat. She knelt in front of the trunk. Wooden, with rusted iron studs, a classic old chest, maybe from her great-grandmother's time. A corroded padlock hung from the front. Elena tugged at it, and the brittle metal broke with a dry snap. The lid was stiff, but it finally gave way, releasing a musty smell as it opened. Inside were several neatly tied bundles of letters and a worn leather notebook. Something metallic gleamed next to them. Elena carefully picked it up and ran her finger across its surface. A medal. An old military medal. Her heart raced. Why was it here? She gently set the medal aside and pulled out one of the bundles, tied with a faded ribbon. On the top envelope, she read the ink-blurred words, "To my beloved Sophie, from Mama." 1942. Sophie, that was her grandmother's name. Sophia Mitchell. Elena covered her mouth with her hand. The letters were from her great-grandmother, writing to her daughter during the war. Her fingers trembled as she untied the ribbon. Several envelopes, fragile with age, each holding carefully folded pages filled with small, precise handwriting. Elena opened the first one. "My sweet girl, your father and I are so glad you and your brother are safe. We think of you every day and pray that we'll be able to hold you again soon. May the kind people sheltering you in their home be forever blessed." The lines blurred before Elena's eyes. Tears welled up, making it hard to read. So, this house once sheltered children from a war, the thought flashed through her mind. A surge of emotion rose in her chest, pride for those unknown people who once lived here, amazement that this basement had been a shelter for her own relatives, and anger at herself for nearly selling the house without ever knowing its story. Elena gently placed the letters back in the chest, then pulled out the old leather-bound notebook. It was a diary. The pages had yellowed, the spine was cracked, but it still radiated the warmth of hands long gone. On the first page, in neat, legible handwriting, it read, "Anna Williams, 1941. So this was her great-grandmother's personal diary, the same woman who had written those letters. But then who was the woman who had taken the children in? Flipping through the fragile pages, Elena skimmed line after line. The diary began in the fall of 1941. Anna wrote about how people in their town were beginning to disappear, about the Nazis who had taken her husband, and then about her decision to send the children west with a neighbor's family who were evaluating. But the children never made it. Their train was bombed, and Sophie and her brother ended up stranded in occupied territory. What followed were pages full of pain and fear, a mother's anguish, the unknown, and then, suddenly, hope. A letter had arrived from a stranger who had taken the children in. Anna wrote about her with deep gratitude and admiration. Her name was Alexandra. As Elena read, the events seemed to unfold vividly before her eyes. Alexandra, a young widow, had risked everything to hide children who weren't her own. She cared for them for years, keeping them safe until liberation came. The final diary entry was dated 1944. Anna wrote about finally reuniting with her daughter and son, and traveling to meet Alexandra to thank her in person. The last line read, "This house is forever our home. We will always remember." Elena's hands went weak, and the diary slid into her lap. She looked up. Outside the dusty basement window, a gray day lingered. The house creaked gently, almost as if responding to what she had just read. Could this be the very house her great-grandmother had written about? Elena's thoughts raced. Her grandmother Sophie had always said she bought the house after the war, when she got married. But what if she had intentionally bought this exact house, the one that had saved her life? It made sense. Especially since she named her daughter, Elena's mother, Alexandra, after the woman who had rescued them. That's why her mother cherished this house until her last breath. Elena opened the chest further and spotted more items at the bottom, a small child's toy, a wooden soldier with a missing arm, and an old photograph. She picked it up carefully. The faded picture showed two thin children, a boy and a girl, holding the hand of a stern-looking woman in a headscarf. On the back, written in pencil, Alexandra Thompson with Colin and Sophie. 1943. Her eyes filled with tears. There she was, Alexandra, the woman who saved her grandmother. And that little girl, Sophie, no older than 10. Elena gently ran her finger across the faces in the photo. Then she noticed another envelope tucked in the corner of the chest, this one more recent, written in pen. It was addressed to Elena. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a short letter. The handwriting was her father's. "My dearest daughter, if you're reading this, it means you're deciding the fate of our home. You've grown up and can make your own choice. But before you do, there's something you need to know, something your mother never spoke about. During the war, this house sheltered children from death, your grandmother and her brother. Our family has always believed this house has a soul and a destiny. It stands for hope, for kindness. Selling it would erase that memory. I couldn't tell you what to do while I was alive, but I ask you now, read the letters and your great-grandmother Anna's diary. Let their words guide you. Whatever you decide, know that I love you and believe in your heart. With love, Dad. The lines blurred before her eyes. Elena pressed the letter to her chest, a wave of emotion rising, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Her father had known. He had prepared everything. He was the one who hid the chest, who left her this message, knowing doubt might overcome her after his passing. So that anonymous message, it must have come from him. Somehow. Her heart whispered, it didn't matter how. What mattered was that she had heard it. Elena wiped her tears with the back of her hand. The sale documents slipped from her loosened grip and scattered across the floor, but she didn't even notice. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath her. Everything she had believed these past months, that the house was just a burden, had turned upside down. Now, the house felt alive, familiar, filled with the spirit of those who had lived and been saved here. To sell it would be to betray her family's memory, and Alexandra Thompson's. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. Elena jolted out of her thoughts. Oh God, I was supposed to be at the notary. She scrambled to her feet, her legs still numb, clutching the precious letters in her hand. The screen showed the buyer's name, Igor Stevens. Elena tapped to call. Hello, Igor? I won't be coming to the meeting, she said, her voice surprisingly calm. I'm sorry, what? The buyer asked, confused. I've changed my mind. I'm not selling the house, Elena said firmly. Are you insane? Igor snapped. We had a deal. People are waiting. I'm sorry, she repeated, steady and clear. But my decision is final. This is a breach of contract. I'll demand compensation. I'll return the deposit and cover the penalty. By the book, Elena replied quietly. Angry shouts echoed through the phone, but Elena wasn't listening anymore. She simply hung up. An hour later, the bewildered buyer showed up in person to figure out what had happened. When he stepped into the house, he found Elena in the living room, dusty, disheveled, but glowing. Spread out on the table in front of her were the letters and the diary. I'm sorry it turned out this way, she said quietly, gathering the letters. I've changed my mind about selling the house. Igor frowned, but seemed to decide it was better to stay calm. Wait, let's not rush into anything, he said, softening his tone. If it's about the money, we can renegotiate. I'm willing to increase the offer. It's not about the money, she replied firmly. This house is not for sale. Not at any price. Igor's face turned pale with rage. Do you have any idea how much this deal falling through is going to cost me? He snapped. This is outrageous. You're free to sue, Elena said calmly. I'll return the deposit and cover any penalties, all according to the rules. But why? We had a deal. He adjusted his tie nervously, looking at her like she'd lost her mind. Elena just smiled faintly in return. I realized something, she said. The true value of this house has nothing to do with money. It's part of my family's history. I almost made a terrible mistake, but now I see clearly. Igor opened his mouth to argue, but then his eyes fell on the old metal and the letters. He scoffed. History, huh? Well, good luck with that. Enjoy your little museum. He turned and stormed out, slamming the front door behind him. Once his footsteps faded, Elena sank into a chair. Tears of relief welled up and began to fall. Her heart was racing, her breath short. Thank you, Dad, she whispered, pressing his letter to her chest. You saved me from a mistake I couldn't have undone. Days passed. Elena managed to cancel the contract and return the deposit. There was still a fine to pay, but then something unexpected happened. A local newspaper got wind of the house's story after she shared it with a journalist friend. They published an article titled "The House That Saved Lives." Readers were moved. A fundraiser began to help restore the old home, and the local history museum offered to create a small exhibit dedicated to Alexandra Thompson's heroism. The community raised enough money to cover Igor's penalty, and even enough to repair the leaking roof. Elena no longer felt alone. There were so many kind people around her now, ready to help preserve her family home. One evening, as workers finished sealing the roof with the donated funds, Elena climbed to the attic to watch the sunset through a new window. Golden light poured across the dusty space. It felt like the house itself was exhaling in relief beneath its strong new roof. Peace filled her chest. On a nearby dresser lay the same war medal, Alexandra Thompson's Medal for Bravery. Elena had tracked it down through the archives. It turned out that Alexandra had been officially recognized after the war for saving the children. Now, the medal had returned to the place where her courage had once made all the difference. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a new message. Absent-mindedly, Elena glanced at the screen and froze. Again. Unknown sender. Her heart skipped. With a trembling finger, she opened the message. Just a few words, thank you. Take care of the house. Tears blurred her vision as a smile broke across her face. Thank you, she whispered, looking out at the glowing sky beyond the window. She had no idea who had been sending the messages. She wasn't going to try to find out. Somehow, she just knew the answer didn't matter. Some miracles weren't meant to be picked apart. All that mattered was this: the house was still standing. And it was alive again. Still, she typed out one short reply. If you ever feel like it, I'd love to thank you in person. You know where to find me. The message sent, but no reply came. And yet, Elena had already won something greater than a deal. She had protected a legacy. She had restored her belief that her family was part of something bigger, something meaningful. This house was in safe hands now. Not just as a building, but as a living piece of soul and history. And along with it, the memory survived of kindness, courage, and quiet light. A light that